When I awoke on the morning of December 7th, I had the duty in the 4th Division. And the division was clean up any activity that we had going and to arrange the ceremonies for our church on the fantail of the ship. So I took my working party and we commenced to do all this sort of thing. And we were a little late getting into the mess hall for breakfast. So we got this straightened out and we went inside to eat. And about the time I got inside to get a chance to eat something, I heard a loud explosion. And I thought, what the dickens is that? And then one of the mess cooks looked out the porthole and saw the explosion and called me. And he said, Andy, you were in China just recently. Well, yes. Well, you know what it was? Did you see that? And I said, no. He said, get out here and take a look. So I went outside the hatch onto the main quarterdeck, looked up and saw this plane with dipping like this, and it had red balls on its wings. And I said, said a cuss word, and I said, the Japanese are here. We already knew this was going to happen sometime, but they're here. And so I ran back toward the hatch door to pull the general alarm. And about the time I got to pull it, which I never did, a bomb dropped between us and the Vestal. And it blew me inside the hatch, knocked me silly. And of course, that set off a wildfire. And of course, the Japanese were then machine gunning the decks, like spraying the decks with machine gun fire. Then more bombs began to drop around us. And of course, we immediately did what we were supposed to do, go to our general quarters station. So I got up off the deck, went down to the lower hatches and back up into the bar bed of number 4 turret, because I was a gunner on my battle station in number 4 turret. And I got into the seat and said, manned and ready. In the meantime, I told the turret captain, Campbell, I said, look, what I saw out there was a number of Japanese planes. I didn't see any ships or anything, and no shell fire. There's all bombs and machine gun fire. And he said, well, what do you suggest? And I said, well, we can't do any good in here. We need some gunners on the anti-aircraft batteries. And if those guys are dead, who's going to defend us from those planes up there? And he says, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I'd like to get out there and get on a gun with my brother. He's an anti-aircraft gun captain, and he needs help. And he said, go for it. So I said, okay. So I talked to a couple other guys that was in there with me, Hogg Otterman and Dwayne Barth and a fellow named Lewis and several other guys. I said, I'm going out the trap door and I'm going up there and get on the guns. If you guys want to stay here, you can do that and man this turret. If they start shelling us, I'll come back. So I won't be gone that long. So I got out of the turret, went out from the overhang of the turret, and started up the ladder to the boat deck where all the anti-aircraft guns were. Well, I got to the top of the ladder, and the enormous explosion occurred, and people were just blown all over the place. There was all kinds of body parts, different. There was nothing I could do to do anything, and a tremendous fire broke out. And then explosions of our artillery that was up with our ammunition started blowing. Knocked me back to as far as number 4 turret. And on the way back, I grabbed a guy by the hand who was on fire, and I held on to him. And he was from Greenfield, Ohio. I never forgot that. And I saved him. I got him out of there. But he was on fire. I got the fire out. And then, of course, there's nothing I could do because everybody was trying to salvage somebody or get them off where they were free and clear. But nobody was free and clear. And some small craft were around us, but they didn't venture too close. But one of them did. And Admiral Fuqua, who was the senior surviving officer there on board, was yelling at me to get in one of those boats. And when I was dumping wounded people that I could find, who were still in one piece, into the boat to take them ashore to the bunker over there on Fort Island. And so he yelling at me to get off. I said, Mike, I'm not leaving. My brother's there someplace. I got to find him. And he says, he can't make it. He couldn't have made it. You just get in there. He said, this place is going to blow. That magazine under you was almost hit by one. And he said, it's liable to go. He says, get out of here. But I wouldn't go. Well, he gave me a big shot. In the meantime, one of the bombs hit the turret that we had been in. And it skidded off the faceplate, which is about 16-inch steel, the faceplate, and went down below and exploded below and killed members of the CIC, Combat Information Center. But we weren't there at the time. We were looking for a different spot on the ship there. And so finally I got over there to the starboard quarter, which is the right-hand quarter of the ship, where that small boat had got in. And a fellow named Alexander was a pilot of this small craft, which I didn't think I'd ever forget, and I didn't this time. And Alexander said, come on, give me the guy, as he did. And I said, no. He said, got any more? And he said, yes. He said, well, get him in here, let's get him on. In the meantime, Admiral Fuquay, who was the lieutenant commander at that time, came over to me and says, you got to get in the boat. We want to save as many men as we can. Get in there. I said, well, I'm not going. He says, yes, you are. And he shoved me in with a loaded wounded man in my hands. So I got in the boat, whether I wanted to or not, and they took off for Ford Island. We got to Ford Island. We unloaded the dead and wounded on some flatbed trucks that came down there to get them. And then I stood outside the bunker, and I looked out there at the Arizona, and I said, it's still on fire, but maybe we can get back and do something. There's a small craft floating by itself, nobody in it. And I turned around and saw this kid standing next to me, and I said, Rose, are you ready to drive back out there and go at it again? He says, if you are, I am. So we swam out, got in that boat, which was just adrift of the Arizona stern, and drove back up alongside the port quarter of the Arizona. That's the left side. And I climbed aboard, and he held us alongside, and we did rescue 3 guys. They were alive. We had so many dead ones that I couldn't tell. In the time that I had, I couldn't have. And other guys were trying to do the same thing, but they must have gone by the time we got back. And I had to take what we could get. So we took these 3 guys and tried to make sure they were okay. And we drove on down. I was a pilot of this small craft. Drove down past the Oklahoma and the West Virginia. And we got down to the seaplane ramp, and a shell or something hit our boat. And it could have been an explosive machine gun fire, explosive bullets. Anyway, it blew our boat apart and lost those 3 guys and Rose. And I was the only one lived alive in that. And I swam around there, and the oil was on fire too, by the way, from the exploded oil tanks. I swam around in this splashing water, trying to duck planes when they were firing on us. And there was other people out there in the water too besides me. And I tried to find these guys we had and get them ashore to Ford Island. But I ran out of gas. I just couldn't do it any longer. So I managed to make it ashore and just fell down on the ground there on the beach. And then Japanese were still running back and forth. A new batch of them from up there came in. It's like second wave, I think. But anyway, they peppered the beach with machine gun fire. And of course, I had to get off the beach before I got hit myself again. And I ran up to the runway, which is on Ford Island, not too far from the beach. And there was a tree and several trees there, and one of them had a 19.3 Springfield rifle and 2 bandoliers of ammunition hanging over a limb there. I thought, my God, this is what's saving me. I've got myself a rifle and 2 bandoliers of ammunition, and that's about 215 rounds, and I'm going to be able to do some good. I took off down the runway and found a bomb hole in the runway and parked there. And got in there, and of course, for some reason or other, they didn't come back and bomb us again. They were down there blowing up the planes a little further away from us. And so a little while later, another guy named, what was his name? Anyway, this other fellow come on. He was in a Marine uniform, dress uniform, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Andy, what are you doing there?" And I said, "Well, that's where I'm going to make my stand." He says, "Well, I've got a machine gun. We can give them hell." I said, "Okay, park with me and we'll ride it out, make our stand here." So he parked in there, and of course the Enterprise was offshore about, I don't know, maybe 200 miles or so, and their planes were coming into land. I guess they weren't aware that it was happening at Pearl. And so they came in trying to land. This was getting dark, and so we didn't know who these people were, whether they were enemy coming back for another run at us or what. Well, my 19th Free Springfield wasn't very good against nighttime pilots and planes. So I didn't do so good with that. And my friend, who later became a sheriff in Georgia, Valdosta, Georgia, Walt Gaskins, that was his name. I couldn't think of his name when I was talking about him. Walt Gaskins. Walt survived the war and went to be a sheriff in Valdosta, Georgia. And but in the meantime, the next morning, we stayed there all night. The next morning, the word came out, the Marines spread a squad out all over looking for fellows who had been hurt, but nobody knew about it. They wanted to find them and pick up the casualties and get the guys back to their own ship if they still could make it. And so they came on to me and Gaskins and told us to report to 1010 Dock, which was across from the Fort Island on the mainland of Honolulu or Pearl. And we went over there and found out there was about maybe 200 guys, all walking wounded, Arizona survivors on 1010 Dock. This man's name was Commander Geiselman. He was a survivor of the Arizona, but he wasn't on the ship when the bombing took place. He'd been ashore, but he'd gone out as close as he could to do some good. And so he organized us all together, found out who needed to go to the hospital and needed to be wrapped up right there with first aid, and to get something to eat, some water, because everybody was dry as a bone, nobody had any water, and volunteer for hazardous duty. So I wanted to stay with the Arizona crowd of survivors and man a ship ourselves. But Captain Geiselman, or Commander Geiselman said, "No, you can't do that. We got to flesh out the ships who've lost men and they need replacements. And you guys are trained sailors, and you're all good at it, and you got to fill out the blanks. So we got to get those ships to sea right now. We got to get a fleet out there to battle the Japanese." And when it came around to me, I said, "I'll volunteer, I'll go." And they said, "Okay." So they sent me to a destroyer, the McDonough. And the McDonough had a landing force, which I'd been doing in China in another destroyer. So I fought from Pearl Harbor on all the way across the Pacific, and so many scrapes and fights that I even forgot the names of the places. But we did raid New Guinea, 2 or 3 places, Hollandia, Salamaua and Lae and New Guinea, and landed at Guadalcanal with the 1st Marine Division, and then we landed at we raided Truk, and all of these raids were pretty dangerous business. And
John, let me tell us what you know about what happened to your brother, and give us his name, too.
I didn't know what happened to my brother. I was out in the Pacific and found out that there was a gunner that was on the boat deck who had charge of all those guns up there, and my brother was under his command. And he said that he put out a brief that he saw Anderson knocked down by gunfire. He was the gun captain on a gun. And then when the explosion occurred, the gunner got blown overboard. So he didn't know what happened, other than most people up there were burned to death or blown to pieces. So they never did find my brother's body. But the last I know about is what this gunner had to say later. And the gunner, of course, was killed after he done this against the kamikazes off the sea off Okinawa when the kamikazes were coming in on the Pacific Fleet units. The gunner was out there and was killed there. So that was the last anybody ever had on my brother.